Growing up, I always believed that having a best friend meant having someone who understood you better than anyone else in the world. Marcus and I met in third grade, two kids getting pushed around on the playground, and from that day forward, we became inseparable. His family welcomed me with open arms, and his mother Linda would cook me dinner every weekend like I was her own son. But here's the thing, nobody ever tells you about loyalty. Sometimes defending the people you love the most can turn your own family against you. My mother called me obsessive and sent me to therapy just because I dared to speak the truth. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you believe that standing up for what is right matters, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. What I am about to share will show you that sometimes your greatest enemy is not a stranger, but someone who shares your last name. Let me tell you how everything began. To understand why I did what I did, you first need to know the kind of family I grew up in. My mother Patricia was the type of woman who cared more about what the neighbors thought than what her own children felt. Everything had to look perfect from the outside, even if things were falling apart behind closed doors. My father Donald was a quiet man, the kind who would rather disappear into the garage than stand up during an argument. He loved us in his own way, but he never had the courage to go against my mother on anything. Then there was my sister Heather, 4 years older than me, and the golden child of our household. From the moment I can remember, Heather got everything she wanted. When she graduated high school, my parents bought her a brand new car with a big red bow on top. When I graduated, I had to work double shifts at a grocery store for 6 months just to afford a beat-up sedan with 150,000 miles on it. My mother always told me I should try to be more like Heather, even though Heather never really accomplished anything remarkable. She just knew how to play the game, how to smile at the right moments and say the right things to keep our parents wrapped around her finger. I spent most of my childhood feeling like a guest in my own home, like someone who was tolerated rather than loved. Every report card I brought home with straight A grades was met with a nod and a quick change of subject. But when Heather managed to pass her classes with C averages, there were celebrations and praise for her hard work. I learned early on that in my family, love was not distributed equally, and no amount of effort on my part was going to change that. The one place where I truly felt like I belonged was at Marcus's house. His father William was a carpenter who built furniture with his own hands, a man with calloused palms and the warmest smile I had ever seen. He taught me how to use a hammer and nails when I was 10 years old, something my own father never took the time to do. Linda worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling long shifts to help pay the bills, but she always made time to cook Sunday dinners that brought the whole family together. Marcus also had a younger sister named Sophie, 3 years younger than us, a sweet girl who laughed easily and made everyone around her feel lighter. I spent almost every weekend at their house throughout middle school and high school. Linda would set an extra plate at the table without me even having to ask. William would invite me to help him in his workshop, teaching me the satisfaction of building something with my own 2 hands. In that small house with creaky floors and a leaky faucet in the kitchen, I found more love and acceptance than I ever experienced in my own home. The contrast between my 2 families was so stark that it sometimes made my heart ache. I would drive the 15 minutes back to my house after a weekend at Marcus's place and feel like I was returning to a cold museum where I was not allowed to touch anything. Everything changed when I was 22 years old. Heather started dating a man named Kevin, a colleague from the real estate company where she worked. Kevin was smooth-talking and confident, the kind of guy who always seemed to be calculating something behind his charming smile. At first, I did not think much of their relationship. Heather went through boyfriends like seasons, and I assumed Kevin would be gone by summer. But then something strange happened. I discovered that Kevin used to be a neighbor of Marcus's family living on the adjacent property about 10 years ago. He moved away after some kind of dispute with William over property lines, though I never knew the details at the time. When Heather found out about this connection, her interest in Marcus's family suddenly intensified in a way that made me uncomfortable. She started asking me questions about them, innocent-sounding inquiries about how they were doing what William was working on, whether they still lived in the same house. but there was something off about her tone, like she was collecting information for a purpose she was not revealing. I remember sitting at our parents' dining table one evening while Heather peppered me with questions about the exact size of their property and whether they had ever done any renovations. I brushed off my unease as paranoia. After all, she was my sister. What reason would she have to wish harm on a family she barely knew? Looking back now, I realize that was the moment I should have trusted my instincts. That uncomfortable feeling in my gut was trying to warn me that something sinister was brewing. But I ignored it because I could not imagine my own sister being capable of what was to come. 6 months after Heather started dating Kevin, I began hearing strange rumors circulating through our small community. Someone told me they heard that William had a criminal record for theft, which was absolutely absurd. William was the most honest man I had ever met, the kind of person who would drive 20 miles to return a wallet he found in a parking lot. Another rumor suggested that Linda had been fired from the hospital for medical negligence, which was equally ridiculous. Linda was a dedicated nurse who had received multiple commendations for her patient care over the years. At first, I dismissed these whispers as small-town gossip, the kind of meaningless chatter that spreads when people have nothing better to do. But then Marcus called me one evening, his voice heavy with confusion and frustration. His father had just lost a major contract to build custom cabinets for a wealthy client. The client had backed out at the last minute, claiming he had heard some disturbing things about William's past and could not risk his reputation by association. I started paying closer attention to where these rumors were originating. I asked questions, followed the threads of gossip back to their sources, and eventually traced them to a group of women who regularly had brunch together at a restaurant downtown. One of those women was a close friend of Heather. When I confronted my sister about it, she laughed in my face. "You are being way too sensitive," she said, twirling a strand of hair around her finger like we were discussing something trivial. "People talk. It is just harmless gossip. You cannot blame me for what other people say." I told my mother what I had discovered, hoping she would see the pattern and intervene. Instead, Patricia looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Why are you so obsessed with that family?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You need to stop sticking your nose where it does not belong. Heather would never do something like that. You are just jealous because she has a successful boyfriend and you do not." I walked away from that conversation feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. My own mother had chosen to believe my sister without even considering the evidence I presented. 3 months later, everything escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. Marcus called me in a panic one afternoon, barely able to get the words out. His family had just been served legal papers. They were being sued over the ownership of their property, the land their house had sat on for 30 years, the only home Marcus and Sophie had ever known. The plaintiff was Kevin. According to the lawsuit, Kevin claimed that his grandfather had originally owned the land and that there were inheritance documents proving his family's rightful ownership. He alleged that the property had been illegally transferred decades ago and demanded that the courts restore what was rightfully his. The documents he presented looked official, complete with stamps and signatures and legal language that made my head spin. William was devastated. He had purchased that property fair and square 30 years ago, had the deed to prove it, and had paid property taxes every single year without fail. But now he was facing the very real possibility of losing his home, the workshop where he had built his livelihood, the yard where his children had learned to ride their bikes. Linda picked up extra night shifts at the hospital to afford a lawyer. The exhaustion was visible in the dark circles under her eyes, in the way her hands trembled slightly when she poured coffee in the morning. Marcus had to put his college education on hold, taking a full-time job at a warehouse to help cover the mounting legal fees. Sophie, who was only 19 at the time, started showing signs of depression. She stopped going out with friends, stopped smiling, spent most of her time locked in her room. Watching this family that I loved being systematically destroyed was more painful than anything I had ever experienced. And the worst part was that I knew who was behind it. I started investigating on my own, driven by a desperate need to find proof of what I already knew in my heart. I discovered that Heather had been helping Kevin gather information about the property, feeding him details, that she had extracted from our conversations. I found text messages on her phone one day when she left it unattended at our parents' house. The messages between her and Kevin were damning discussions about how to make the documents look authentic, jokes about how easy it was going to be to take everything from those people. When I confronted Heather with the evidence, her demeanor shifted from dismissive to threatening. "If you say a single word about this to anyone," she hissed, her eyes cold and hard, "I will make your life a living hell. Mom and Dad will believe me over you any day of the week. You will be the crazy one, not me. So keep your mouth shut and stay out of our business." I did not keep my mouth shut. I went straight to my mother and showed her the text messages, certain that this concrete proof would finally make her see the truth. But Patricia's reaction was nothing like what I expected. "You went through your sister's phone," she screamed, her face turning red with anger. "What is wrong with you? This obsession with Marcus's family is unhealthy. You need professional help." She refused to even look at the messages. She refused to acknowledge what was right in front of her eyes. The next week, Patricia announced that she had made an appointment for me with a therapist. She said I was exhibiting obsessive behavior and needed to be evaluated before I did something that could not be undone. When I protested, she threatened to cut me off completely to tell everyone we knew that her son had serious mental health issues. My father stood silently in the corner during this entire confrontation, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. So I went to therapy. I sat in a stranger's office while my mother's version of events was presented as fact. The therapist, a well-meaning woman named Dr. Patterson, initially approached me with the assumption that I was indeed struggling with an unhealthy attachment to another family. It took several sessions before she began to see through the lies my mother had told her. During this time, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. My own family had branded me as mentally unstable simply because I refused to participate in their cover-up. Marcus still believed me, still stood by my side. But his family was drowning in their own crisis and could not offer much support. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I care to admit, questioning whether I was actually crazy, wondering if maybe my mother was right and I was seeing conspiracies where there were none. But deep down, I knew the truth. And I decided that I would not rest until everyone else knew it too. I spent the next 3 months conducting my own investigation with the methodical determination of someone who has nothing left to lose. While Kevin and his lawyers prepared for trial, confident that their fabricated documents would hold up in court, I was quietly dismantling their entire case piece by piece. My first stop was the county records office, a dusty building downtown where property records dating back over 100 years were stored in filing cabinets and digitized databases. I spent hours there going through every document related to the property that Marcus's family owned. I found the original deed from when William purchased the land, the chain of title going back 5 previous owners, and most importantly, the complete records of Kevin's grandfather's property holdings. His grandfather had never owned a single square foot of the land in question. The inheritance documents Kevin had presented were complete fabrications, but I needed more than just proof that his documents were fake. I needed to prove who had created them and why. Through a contact I made at a local print shop, I learned that Kevin had hired someone to create the forged documents. The employee who did the work had since left the company and was willing to talk, especially when I explained that he could face legal consequences if he remained silent. His name was Gerald, a middle-aged man with nervous eyes who told me everything in exchange for my promise to advocate for leniency on his behalf. He had kept copies of the files Kevin had given him, email correspondence discussing exactly what needed to be forged, and payment records that traced directly back to Kevin's bank account. Armed with this information, I took one more risk. I knew that Heather and Kevin met every Thursday evening at his apartment to discuss their strategy. Using a recording application on my phone, I positioned myself outside his window, which he always left cracked open because he was a heavy smoker. I recorded over 2 hours of conversation, during which both of them explicitly admitted to fabricating the documents, spreading false rumors about William and Linda, and planning to sell the property once they won the lawsuit. Heather even laughed about how stupid I was for trying to warn our parents, confident that she would never face any consequences. I took all of this evidence to the lawyer representing Marcus's family, a sharp-minded woman named Janet, who had been struggling to find holes in Kevin's case. When she saw what I had gathered, her eyes went wide. "This is not just enough to win," she said, flipping through the pages I had printed. "This is enough to send them to prison." The trial date arrived on a Wednesday in October. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with wooden benches that creaked when you shifted your weight and fluorescent lights that gave everyone a slightly sickly pallor. William sat at the defendant's table with Linda beside him, both of them looking exhausted and terrified. Marcus sat directly behind them, his jaw clenched tight. Sophie had wanted to come but was too fragile, so she stayed home with a family friend. My parents arrived and took seats on the opposite side of the courtroom there to support Heather and Kevin. When my mother saw me sitting with Marcus's family, she shot me a look of pure contempt, shaking her head slowly as if I was the biggest disappointment of her life. I met her gaze without flinching. Kevin's lawyer presented their case first, laying out the forged documents with theatrical confidence. He spoke about justice and rightful inheritance and the tragedy of a family being denied what belonged to them for decades. It was a compelling performance, and I could see some of the jury members nodding along. Then it was our turn. Janet called me to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and for the next 45 minutes that is exactly what I did. I walked the jury through my investigation step by step, showing them the real property records, the evidence of forgery, the testimony from Gerald, the print shop employee. I explained how my own sister had helped orchestrate this scheme, how she had used information I innocently shared to help Kevin build his case. And then I played the recording. The courtroom went dead silent as Kevin and Heather's voices filled the room, laughing about their plan, mocking Marcus's family, celebrating how easy it had been to fool everyone. I watched Heather's face drain of color as she heard her own words broadcast for everyone to hear. Kevin tried to interrupt, shouting that the recording was inadmissible, but the judge overruled him. My mother shot to her feet when the recording ended, screaming that I had betrayed my own family, that I was a traitor and a liar, and she wished she had never given birth to me. The judge had to threaten to remove her from the courtroom before she finally sat back down, still seething. The jury did not need long to deliberate. They returned with a verdict in under an hour, finding in favor of Marcus's family and recommending that Kevin be investigated for criminal fraud. The judge not only dismissed Kevin's lawsuit entirely, but also awarded damages to William and Linda for the emotional distress and financial hardship they had endured. In the months that followed, Kevin was formally charged with forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. He was eventually sentenced to 2 years in state prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution to Marcus's family. Heather was charged as an accomplice. She received a 3-year suspended sentence and 200 hours of community service. Her real estate company fired her the day the verdict was announced, and her career in that industry was effectively over. My mother tried to contact me after the trial, leaving voicemails that alternated between angry accusations and tearful pleas. She never once admitted that she had been wrong about Heather. She never once apologized for calling me obsessive or forcing me into therapy. In her mind, I was still the villain who had torn our family apart. I did not return her calls. My father reached out separately, sending me a letter about a month after everything settled down. In it, he admitted that he had always known Patricia favored Heather, that he had seen the unfairness, but had been too weak to speak up. He said he was proud of what I had done, proud that I had the courage he never possessed. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, and try to rebuild something from the ashes. I agreed to meet him. We talked for 3 hours at a small diner outside of town, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my father actually saw me. It was not instant forgiveness. Years of neglect and silence could not be erased by a single conversation. But it was a start, a tiny crack in the wall that had always separated us. Dr. Patterson, the therapist my mother had forced me to see, wrote a formal report after the trial concluded. In it, she stated that I showed no signs of obsessive behavior or mental illness. She wrote that I demonstrated exceptional loyalty, moral courage, and psychological resilience. She said that my only diagnosis was having a family that did not deserve me. The year after the trial was a time of healing for everyone involved, though the process was neither quick nor easy. William's business slowly recovered as word spread about what had actually happened. People who had believed the rumors felt guilty and went out of their way to support him, hiring him for projects and recommending him to friends. Linda cut back on her night shifts, finally able to breathe without the constant weight of legal fees pressing down on her chest. Sophie started seeing a counselor who specialized in anxiety and depression, and month by month, her smile began to return. I moved into my own apartment, a small place with barely enough room for a bed and a couch, but it was mine. I needed space from everything that had happened, room to process the betrayal, and begin building a life that was not defined by my family's dysfunction. There were nights when the pain still hit me hard, moments when I would remember my mother's face twisted in anger as she called me obsessive, and I would have to remind myself that I had done the right thing. Marcus and I grew even closer through everything we had endured together. We talked about opening a business combining my love of woodworking that William had taught me with Marcus's head for numbers and planning. 2 years after the trial, we made that dream a reality, starting a small furniture workshop in a rented space on the outskirts of town. William served as our mentor and occasional partner, teaching us the finer points of craftsmanship while we handled the business side. Sophie started calling me her brother, not her brother's friend, but her actual brother. She would text me for advice about college applications and relationship problems, and I would do my best to guide her the way an older sibling should. Linda continued her Sunday dinner tradition, and I never missed a single one. Sitting at that table surrounded by people who loved me without conditions or expectations, I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like. My relationship with my father developed slowly but steadily. We met for coffee every few weeks, and gradually those meetings became more comfortable, more honest. He told me stories about his own childhood, about how his father had been cold and distant, and how he had never learned what it meant to stand up for the people he loved. He was trying to change, he said, even at his age. I respected him for that. As for my mother and Heather, I made peace with the fact that some relationships cannot be repaired. Patricia never acknowledged her role in what happened, never admitted that she had chosen to believe lies over truth, because it was easier than facing the ugliness in her favorite child. The last I heard, she was telling people that I had been manipulated by Marcus's family, that I was the victim of their influence rather than a man who made his own choices. Some people believed her. Most did not. The biggest lesson I learned through all of this is that family is not defined by blood. Family is defined by who shows up when everything falls apart, who believes in you when the world calls you crazy, who sets a place for you at their table without being asked. William and Linda and Marcus and Sophie became my real family not because we shared DNA, but because we shared love and loyalty and the willingness to sacrifice for each other. I also learned that being called obsessive by people who lack the courage to face the truth is not an insult. It is a badge of honor. I was obsessive about protecting the people I loved, obsessive about seeking justice, obsessive about refusing to let evil win just because it wore a familiar face. If that makes me obsessive, then I will wear that label proudly for the rest of my life. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, no matter how many lies are piled on top of it. You just have to be patient enough to keep digging, brave enough to keep speaking, and strong enough to withstand the attacks that will come from those who benefit from deception. So let me ask you this. If you were in my situation, would you have stayed silent to keep peace in your family, or would you have spoken up to protect the people who actually deserved your loyalty? Your answer will tell you a lot about what you are willing to sacrifice for what you believe in. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story today. If it resonated with you, please take a moment to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? I would love to hear your experiences. If this story moved you, hit that like button to let me know and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that standing up for the truth is always worth it, even when it costs you everything. May you always find the courage to defend those who deserve your love, and may you be surrounded by people who would do the same for you.